Good afternoon. It is an honor to be able to present and talk with you guys today. I'm Fallon Brewer. I'm a genetic counselor at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. Emily and I are presenting today on future planning. So we'll cover a wide variety of topics, but we really want this to be interactive. So feel free to interrupt, ask questions. We can go into more in depth than what's on the slides. We just wanted to kind of hit the high points. We can go into information that is not on the slide. So everything is fair game. So please, ask questions and be involved. We really want to have a dialogue with everyone today. So to jump right in, just the disclaimer slide. Like Allison mentioned, keep your mask on. You can also ask questions through the app. It is also being live streamed, so we'll have questions that way as well. So kind of jumping back right in, when we talk about future planning, a topic that is inevitably going to come up is genetic testing for Huntington's disease. And I know we may have a wide variety of backgrounds in the room as far as family histories and genetic testing is concerned. But when we think about genetic testing for HD, you may find yourself in kind of one of these three categories: yes, no, or maybe. And you may oscillate between all three categories at any given point, and that is totally normal. So if you found yourself or have found yourself in the yes category, then hopefully you've gotten involved with a Centers of Excellence near you or provider near you that has helped facilitate that, or you're able to get plugged in if that's the decision that you make, and they can really help walk you through the process and provide resources. You may find yourself in the no category, and that is totally okay as well. It's important to remember that predictive testing is a very personal choice, and only you know what is best for you and when that timing is right. So it can still be helpful to be involved with a center near you. There are research studies, other resources that can be beneficial. So even if you find yourself in that category, certainly there are still resources available that you might find helpful. And then lastly, you might find yourself in the maybe category, and that's okay to be undecided. Depending on your phase in life, you may go between yes, maybe, no, and back and forth multiple times. That's another reason why we really don't recommend testing under the age of 18 for predictive testing. So if someone's totally asymptomatic, letting that person turn 18 and decide when and how, if they want to know that information. So that way they really have the autonomy and can drive the decision for themselves. Yes.
Can I pause for a second? Does anyone have a question about testing or the process or thinking about it or on the fence that you want to pause and talk about?
I'd like to know what that center that you're talking about is, because I really don't know anything. It says COE.
Sure. So there's multiple centers of excellence across the U.S., and those are facilities that are multidisciplinary in care, typically are staffed by neurologists, psychiatrists, genetic counselors, social workers, therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists. So really a team approach to healthcare, and usually as part of the testing process, HCSA does have a protocol in place, though centers vary. It's not completely, black and white from center to center. There is some variation, but usually the first step is meeting with a genetic counselor, either in person or through telemedicine, to go over your personal and family history, to talk about the testing process. It is a multi-step process, and that is not to be restrictive or to be a barrier, but really to make sure that someone is set up for success regardless of the results. Yes. Any other questions so far?
Can I add something? So we don't have exact statistics for people who test, but it is estimated that only 7 to 10% of people who are living at risk actually test. So it's a really small number. More people choose to stay in that at-risk status until they start to see signs or symptoms. And I work in a center of excellence also, and so I just want to let you know that it's really important, if you are considering testing, to do it at a center of excellence for Huntington's, because some people end up having these conversations with their neurologist or their primary care doctor who's like, oh, I'll just run this lab for you. And when you go to a center of excellence, you're going to be supported by a genetic counselor, a social worker, maybe a psychologist, definitely a movement disorder physician. And so these are the people that understand everything you're walking in the door with, that will be able to hold your hand, talk to you about all the family dynamics, everything you're worried about. So that's really the place to go and travel for. It's worth traveling to if you're not super close to begin that process. Sorry.
Yeah, and just to, oh, go ahead. You could try that way, or the HCSA website has a link with all of the centers as well. Yes. And just to Emily's point as well, you know, with genetic testing and a lot of people deciding to stay in that at-risk category versus being tested, as a genetic counselor, what I saw kind of an increase, those numbers used to be even smaller, but with all of the trials and potential therapies on the market, a lot of those require you to know your status to be eligible. And so that was kind of an increase in the blip of people who were interested in at least talking about it. And talking about it doesn't commit you to doing it. So reaching out to a center and talking to a genetic counselor does not mean you have to go through every step. It is still all determined by the individual. So one thing that comes up often when we are looking at planning is a lot of people may choose to do genetic testing for family planning purposes. For some, the knowledge of an HD gene status would not influence family planning decisions, but for some it may. And so that's a very common theme for individuals who are interested in genetic testing, is because they may use that information to determine how they choose to build their family. And so we'll talk some about those options today, but again, feel free to jump in. So if someone tests and is negative, or they choose not to test, typically that person's going to continue on with their decisions based on that information. But if someone tests and is gene positive, then there are several options for family planning. So certainly one would be spontaneous pregnancy, spontaneous conception, with or without any kind of prenatal genetic testing. Typically, in the setting of spontaneous pregnancy, most people choose no prenatal testing in that instance, because they kind of take the mindset of, I'm not going to intervene, whatever will be, and as that child ages, they can decide when and if they want to know that information. Knowing that if one parent is HD positive, there's a 50-50 chance for each of their children. Yes, ma'am.
I know that it would be wonderful if we could stop passing it down, but I've heard that screening is really expensive. Is there any move to help families fund this, that families that want to have children?
That's a great question. So the option you're referring to is that last one, the PGT with IVF. And there's a whole talk tomorrow morning about that. So definitely attend that for a way more in-depth conversation. But what that is using something called pre-implantation genetic testing, which requires in vitro fertilization. So it does get pricey because of the methods to do that. So typically that process is, several $1,000s, and it doesn't guarantee to result in pregnancy. So that is one way to decrease the likelihood of passing on the HD positive gene. Typically for someone who does prenatal testing with amniocentesis, that is typically done under the assumption that that person would not continue an affected pregnancy, which is not an option for everyone. But otherwise, if you test and continue, then you're really taking away that child's autonomy to decide that as they get older. And so there are unique circumstances in which someone may choose to test during pregnancy. So again, using an egg or a sperm donor could be an option. And again, these options are very personal. So for some people, they may not be options for them, whether ethically, religiously, morally, they may not choose to even consider those. But we wanted to be comprehensive in what we talked about, just so everyone's aware of what does exist. That doesn't mean that it's an option for you. But using an egg or a sperm donor can also help reduce the chance by using that donor for whichever individual in the couple is at risk or affected with HD. Adoption as well, and then like we talked about, the pre-implantation genetic testing with IVF. There certainly are limitations and benefits to each of these options, so none are perfect. But there are varying stages, depending on a couple's desires and plans to move forward.
Okay.
And you'll see in a minute when we talk about other things like life insurance, there's different rules for different aspects of what you're looking at. So, yes. Some people choose to get policies in place ahead of time for that reason. Typically, it's not a requirement, by centers, but it's something that should be talked about just so patients and individuals know their options so that they can work through those things on the front end versus trying to figure it out afterwards. Another option that some centers will offer is anonymous testing, and again, for privacy and confidentiality reasons, some individuals are interested in this option so that a genetic test report is not tied to your name. And so, again, that's varied center by center, but a lot will offer that option. Again, benefits and limitations to both. The benefits, certainly it could add a added layer of confidence to the individual that information, if it even was to get into the wrong hands, it would not have their name tied to it, so it would not be linked back to them. The disadvantage could be, say, an individual tests negative, and then they try to go obtain life insurance. You can't just call the lab and say, change Mary Smith to, Michelle Silver. You're going to have to be retested, which could incur additional cost. So again, not options or, not on the list for everyone, but certainly is an option depending on the center that you go through. So any questions about any of these other considerations or anything we've talked about so far?
Can I add one thing for anonymous testing? So if you come in under a different name, that would be private pay because you're not using your insurance. Just so you know, though, if you test positive and you want to start treatment, you have to redo that test under your name. So it can be expensive and just really emotionally exhausting because you're going back to the office to rerun that test and do that whole process again.
Correct.
Yes, Allison.
Is genetic testing required to start treatment?
Typically, no. So there's kind of two pathways for testing. One would be at risk, so not symptomatic, but at risk based on a family history. The other would be confirmatory, typically already manifesting some symptoms. And that's why usually as part of the process there is a neurologic exam, because sometimes there may be very subtle symptoms already evident that are not evident to the individual or their loved ones who are around them all of the time. So typically I know genetic testing is not covered by insurance usually very well, and we encourage patients to not use their insurance for predictive testing for that reason. It used to be very expensive to do. It's still not cheap, but a lot of companies offer it between $200 to $250. So reasonable compared to the thousands of dollars that it used to be. And a lot of centers, too, another reason to go through a Centers of Excellence is a lot of centers may choose to kind of earmark some of their funds for help with genetic testing so that, again, finances are not a barrier to someone who wants that information.
Are there any issues with false positives or false negatives?
Because of the methodology, how they do the test, typically not. It's accounting. It's looking at the number of repeats within the HD allele. So you can have plus or minus one variation, but it's typically very straightforward. There's categories with genetic testing. I'm not sure, Ray's background and what they're familiar with. So if you're looking at the HD gene, it's made up of a bunch of letters repeated over and over, CAG, CAG, CAG. And 26 or less repeats is considered the normal range. So if both numbers come back 26 or less, that's a totally normal result. If one of those numbers is 40 or more, then that would be consistent with a diagnosis, that symptoms would show up at some point. But the category of 27 to 39, really 27 to 35, and then 36 to 39 can be a little bit trickier for interpretation, which goes back to Emily's point of going through a center versus your primary care provider. Is if you come back in that category, the interpretation and what you get told can vary greatly depending on who's telling you the result.
Hey, yeah, just a quick question on that. I've heard that there's this gray area when it comes to testing, that sometimes you don't get a positive or negative result, that you do fall in that in between. Can you tell us the percentage of folks who get tested for which that applies?
That's a great question. I don't know the most recently reported number. The 36 to 39 range would be what's kind of considered that gray zone or intermediate. And it is low, but I don't know 3% versus 5%. And the reason is individuals in that zone or in that range may never show symptoms, but could still have passed it on. Or they may show very mild symptoms and be diagnosed at a much later age. Or they may be limited in their symptoms, like they may have more of the cognitive or behavioral symptoms versus the chorea or the movement, or vice versa. So I think too, from the literature, even the papers that do give percentages, it can be hard to know for sure because there may be people in that range who never present because they never manifested any symptoms. Yes.
Hold up.
Do you know if you have to have like a doctor's referral in order to get into a center of excellence?
So for the predictive testing process, you do not.
Not predictive, I've already been tested.
Got it. So most centers, well, that's a good question. It can be helpful depending on how your care would be managed later on, meaning, for some people, the centers are very not convenient to where someone lives. And so they may be managed by a center, but then also see local providers for other things. So for sharing of information, having that referral in place so that the providers can communicate without you having to be the middleman can be helpful. But unless your insurance requires a referral, or unless it's the institution's policy to require a referral, then it wouldn't necessarily be required.
Can I add to that? It is going to be insurance-based. If you have an HMO that has a gatekeeper system, you will need a referral. And if you are denied and they say, no, you have a neurologist down the street you can go to, you have to advocate. You cannot say no. You cannot take no as for an answer. Like, I'm the Illinois chapter social worker, so I have a letter written that kind of explains why someone needs to go to specialty care. So you can get enough documentation to make that argument, because insurance companies will be like, no, this is the process, you need to go and network. But if you know to fight for it and you put the effort into it, you can make that work. It's just a lot of paperwork.
I'm going to apologize up front because I was taking notes and I missed the part where there was like this gray area with genetic testing. Can you please repeat what that meant?
Yeah, so the range of 36 to 39 repeats is a range where some individuals may show symptoms and some may not. So it can be harder to interpret in the context of someone who's asymptomatic if they will develop symptoms or not, what age, what severity, that kind of thing.
So that gray area isn't necessarily, do I have the genetic marker or I don't?
Correct.
I gotcha. Okay.
Right. It gives you a number. It just doesn't give us as much information about knowing. And again, not even knowing 40 or 42 doesn't give us an exact science of this is when symptoms will appear, this is how it will be. There's lots of other modifying factors that influence that. And a lot of research being done in that area to understand why, two people within the same family who both have 42 repeats may present very differently from one another. That 27 to 35 range is more of an intermediate zone where a person within that range would never show symptoms. They could live to be 120 years old and they would never show symptoms, but especially when passed through sperm, so passed through a male, there's some instability where it can increase in size. So that generations forward may be at risk. And that's why a lot of people will say, well, this just seemed to kind of pop up out of nowhere, is that could have been kind of increasing over multiple generations. So, anything else? All right, well, I will turn it over to Emily then.
Hi, so I know I've been interrupting this, so I'm sorry. Just trying to add to the conversation. My name is Emily. I am a social worker. I have multiple roles within HDSA. I'm the Illinois chapter social worker. I work for the National Youth Alliance. I run the at-risk support group online through HDSA, and I work at Northwestern in their outpatient HD clinic. So I'm not impacted by HD. I fell into this job, and then I never left. So it's nice to see you all here. So I'm going to talk sort of about the social piece, more of like the life skills, things you might be thinking of that are less medical, and kind of talking about the different ages because it impacts people at, differently where you are. So for the younger people in here living at risk or even gene positive, things you will be thinking about that might be difficult are your family relationships, the relationships that people you're caring with, your siblings, your cousins. Do your cousins not know? I mean, it's complex, right? Not everybody talks about it, and each family is so different about how they handle HD. So your friendships, I mean, I know people that haven't told a single friend that there's HD in their family, and I think that's probably really hard to be doing this alone. Your teachers, your coaches, and then we just had a National Youth Alliance Day yesterday where we brought people, we had about 40 people who were younger than 30 together, and it's a really, really amazing support for those of you that don't know about it. I think there's a bunch of you in this room that can attest. The community it makes and builds for people is great. And then later on in life, the teens, 20s, like again, your immediate family, but things that constantly come up are dating. Like, how do you tell someone that you're at risk for this disease? When is the right time? And the answer is, there is no right time. It's what works for you in the moment. Some people tell somebody right off the bat. Some people might wait a couple months. There's no rule book for this. I think it's helpful to connect with other people in this community to share those questions with and brainstorm. But I know it's really hard to find, like with the dating and moving forward in relationships and family planning, it's when you disclose, how you disclose is a very, very personal journey. Again, as I mentioned, friends and then coworkers, because people are very afraid to share this. But I think that if you have someone you trust at work that you can share this disease and the information about this disease, it's really important to bring your network and have the support in all areas of your life. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay. And as I mentioned, dating, there is no one size fits all for Huntington disease. You have to give yourself time and grace to figure out when it is. I think that it becomes really big in someone's head when talking about this and really consuming. And I think it's important to give yourself grace and take time and do whatever works best for you. You'll know when the right time is, and this journey is different for every single person. Anybody in here want to share an experience? Okay. Continuing education. I know a lot of people that feel like, why should I do this? I might get sick when I'm 40. Why should I go on and be a doctor? Why should I become a lawyer? And the answer is, you should do whatever you want to do. And I want to give everybody here permission, and anybody that's online, to do this. We don't know what tomorrow brings for us. We all have, this room has additional information about the future, the yes or no, the flip of a coin. But there's loan forgiveness for people who get sick. So if you get sick later on life and you have debt for law degree or whatever kind of school you choose to do, there's ways to get rid of that debt. You can also plan ahead financially. So start saving money ahead of time because you know that you have this extra risk of getting ill younger. And do it. Do whatever makes you feel good. Don't let this disease stop you. Take charge of your life. I know that it's really hard, but I want to leave you with that. And then social media is a really, really big part of everybody who's young in here. Maybe somebody else, some people who are a little bit older, but I know it's really 20 and 30s, really big presence in your life. And people are very, very scared to talk about Huntington disease in the social media. And so this is just an example of, one of the things that HD has, and they had this whole month of stories about HD and people sharing their stories. And a lot of people, it was like a big deal to film a video about their experience or share it on social media. But if you want to talk about it, but you don't want it to be about you, you can just be like, hey, I'm supporting Fred for Huntington disease today. And you can kind of tell a white lie to share your experiences and make it not about you. So you can still talk about, get awareness out or, share a friend's story or whatever and not make it about you and not make it tied back about you. If you want it to be about you, that is even better. But if you are not comfortable, there's ways about doing it or just participating that can get the word out and let people know that this is an important thing in your life because of somebody else. And we talked about, I know that we already talked about this with health insurance. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about this a little bit more in depth. So for health insurance right now, you have no risk of being denied because of history of HD. So you're protected by, there's a law called GINA, Genetics Information Non-Discrimination. So that is not an issue. What the issue becomes is for when you want to get additional private insurance, and that you give them permission to look through your medical record. So if you have documented that you have Huntington disease, they're going to be like, well, I'm not going to give you long-term care or, disability insurance. However, if you're working, and Allison will talk more about this later, you're already paying into a disability program through Social Security disability income. So you're already putting into a program that can help you if you have to stop working. And one of the things I was like shocked about when I got this job, because I didn't know about, is that there's requirements for work credit. So you have to work 5 out of the last 10 years, right? Okay.
I'm so proud. She's learned so much.
She's yeah, right? So anyway, so a lot of times more women than men take time off to raise their kids, then they become disabled, but they have been gone, not working for 10 years, and poof, that disability is gone for them. So for all of you, like just planning ahead, no, you have to have worked 5 years before you want to, 5 out of 10 years before you want to go out on disability. So it's just really, really important to just know that and tuck that information away, because for those of you who are younger, like, why am I thinking about this? Why would you think about it? Because Allison told me to tell you all that you have to think about it really, really early and just be prepared, because you don't want to lose out on that. And also, HDSA is lobbying really hard right now. We're lobbying our legislators. There's a 2-year waiting period to get on, it's actually 2.5 years, to get onto Medicare once you're approved for disability. So if you have to stop working, then you have to apply for disability, which can take a long time, and you're not working, you have no income, no health insurance, and you still have to wait 2.5 years from the day you're approved for SSDI. So if you go to any of the advocacy things, they really need you to lobby your local, your congressmen, men and women, your senators, to try to get this bill passed, because it's really important. They're trying to waive the 2.5-year waiting period. Do you guys have any, so all of these things just about testing is you don't want your HD documented in your medical chart, because if you want to get this at some point, you give them access to your chart, and then they'll be like, no, we see you have a family history. So and a lot of people, we talked about this yesterday at NYA Day, like a lot of people are hung up about, long-term care insurance, but long-term care insurance is really, really expensive. So if you don't want to pay out those premiums, you can also just start planning ahead of time and put your money away in your 401k and other kind of different kind of investing to invest for retirement, to make sure that you'll be like secure later on if you need more care.
Just to jump in real quick on that point too, that's another reason being connected with a center near you or close to you can be helpful, because I know, for instance, some centers don't document anything in their health record. They keep a shadow chart. And so others, it goes directly into the medical record, and it's tied just like your PCP visit or GYN visit or whatever it may be. So those are good questions to ask, before moving forward, so that if that is a concern, that you could try to find another center, even if it means not the closest one to you, that would allow that to be an option.
Yeah, I know one of the centers, when they do testing, even when you go through insurance, they document like headaches and anxiety. So they'll come in for the first appointment, document headaches and anxiety, and then nothing in there about HD, and then it isn't documented until the results come in. So you have time, like providers will give you time to get anything you want to get taken care of, any of these kind of insurance policies taken care of. And again, that's why you want to go to a center of excellence, because I feel like if you go to just a regular genetic counselor who doesn't know about this, or just a lab, you're not going to have these really, really important conversations. Okay. And then I'm going to assume some of you are anybody caregivers in here. And also, there's people who are kids that have been caregivers. Maybe you are caregiving at a much younger age, or caregiving as an adult. What are you doing for yourself? Like, what are you doing for yourselves? Because sometimes people are sandwiched in between caregiving. People like end up caregiving for a parent and a sibling, and then also concerned for their own kids. So also just preparing for your own long-term needs, your own life, because if you're not sick, fill your bucket lists. Like, I know it's hard, but a lot of people are like, I can't move away, I can't do this, I can't take this job. Find a way to refocus yourself and still live your full life that you can. I know it's really hard, but it has to start with you and finding a way to fill your life. And remember to live your best life. And then I just end with, remember you are responsible for your future, so take charge and turn your life into whatever it is you want it to be. Yes?
I have you asked earlier if anyone wanted to share any experience. And I would say for those maybe who are afraid to share their stories at work, and especially if you're a caregiver too, or either way, I guess. I shared my story at work about my husband's recent diagnosis, and I really laid it all out there with my boss, and I was in tears and all that. And it actually worked out in our favor, because after my boss realized how serious the diagnosis was. He had heard about the diagnosis, but at first he didn't realize how bad it was when I kind of explained more about the disease. Now he's letting me work from home a couple days a week so I can spend more time with him. And so it can help to not be afraid to share your story at work.
I want to add to that. I'm sorry, do you want to go?
So it's two separate but related, I suppose. So with SDI, so I was let go from my job about 2 years ago, and we applied roughly shortly afterwards, and we finally got it, but it took a long time, like you said. But at least they do give you back pay.
Yes.
So you get like this great bonus for all this waiting. It's like the least it's worth it if you're lucky enough to have someone who's paying the bills, like me. That's not for everybody, obviously. And so the other item is, let's see. So you were talking about dating, and so again, I lost my job when we were dating for about 3 or 4 years, and instead of I felt I was humiliated. I didn't know what the problem was. I hadn't had the diagnosis yet. I just thought it was stress, and just I don't know. Sorry, I was really embarrassed about it in the worst possible way, and I lost sleep over it from many times, and I still do. Sorry, but anyhow, so we got married instead of losing. Many couples break up after stuff like that, but she said no, let's get married, and she didn't even know what it was. She just knew it was something bad, but she didn't care. So I lucked out.
You did. You did. I want to say 2 things about that. So, SSDI, the doctors are not great at documenting disability, and so you need to be a really big advocate for yourself. Or SSI, which is insurance for people based on a lower income. You need to be your own advocate and have the biggest medical documentation is like, that's your friend. And so you want the doctor, when you start going to the doctor, to be like, okay, I might be having some cognition issues, or I'm having a hard time standing all day, because what they'll say at SSI when you apply is like, okay, so maybe you can't work as an attorney anymore, but you can go be a checkout person at Walgreens. So you really need to have these conversations with if you're seeing a psychiatrist and your movement disorder physician, explaining exactly why, because that's gonna be the biggest support for approval for disability. The other thing I want to say, thank you for sharing the work, is that there are benefits for people who have to take leave to care for people. There's Family Medical Leave Act, which you can do over a long period of time, or you can do intermittent. And so you just need a letter from the doctor who you're caring for yourself, explaining why you need this, and you're basically setting yourself up to safety net. So like, I still can work, but I might have a condition where I need to be out more, or I'm a caregiver and I'm caring for someone. And if you're a caregiver and you need intermittent care, you're just going to HR and being like, hey, I'm taking 5 days off, and you're set. They know ahead of time. You're protecting yourself.
And getting to your question, I have created a whole bunch of resources to answer a lot of these questions, and they're on HDSA's website. There's webinars. Actually, the most recent webinar I did was how to advocate for yourself, how to advocate at work, how to advocate with your doctors, how to advocate with Social Security. And these things are on HDSA's YouTube page as well, because there are so many questions about these things in the HD community. we don't talk about them as a society. So we need to have this information. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, but we're getting there.
Okay, this is about the FMLA.
Yeah.
How do you prove you're a caregiver if you're not a family member?
Yeah, good question.
This is going back to law school. Like, yeah, this is going way back. It's going way back. So, like, there are certain, it's built into FMLA what kind of relationships are accepted. It doesn't just have to be like a traditional nuclear family, because I had to write an argument about in loco parentis, which was it was complicated. But FMLA builds in things, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific blood or like specific nuclear family. But you probably do have to submit additional documentation. And just as everybody knows, FMLA only applies if your employer has 50 or more people. So if you work for a small organization, like technically HDSA, we don't have 50 or more people, so FMLA doesn't have to apply. They can use it, but it's not forced, so that's something to keep in mind. I will do some research and get back to you about FMLA, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I think there are some extra protections built in, because we do know you can't have family, that it's not necessarily blood, and there's circumstances that come up and things that happen, but you're still family and you still need to care for that person. So I will do some additional research.
I wonder if we have to do like some sort of power of attorney or anything like that.
You should.
You should always do power of attorney, and just so everyone knows, and then I'm going to give it back to Emily, because this is not my presentation today. Power of attorney is great, doesn't work for Social Security disability. You have to have guardianship, or you have to fill out a different form. Social Security is really specific, and power of attorney is not enough for Social Security to talk to you, the loved one, the spouse, whoever. They only talk to the person with HD. So if you want to make sure things are doing the appropriate things in the case, you either have to get something called an appointment of representative form, because you can be a representative for a friend or family member as long as you're not taking a fee, or you have to have full guardianship, and usually you don't need guardianship at the point somebody needs disability. It's way too soon for that.
And the other thing that I didn't mention is power of attorney for healthcare and power of attorney for property, which you really want to have lined up as soon as possible, just because even if you get into an accident, you become incapacitated, you need someone to be able to help you. So those are two really important forms. Best practice is to hire an attorney, but in reality, you can Google them for your state and print them out, although not best practice, but definitely like a quick fix, right? I just want to say they're out there.
Well, in some states, it's actually through the state bar association, so that's more trustworthy than others. Do I know all 50 states' regulations off the top of my head? No, but I definitely know in some states you can get a power of attorney from the bar association, so that is going to comply with state law, versus other states where it's just finding something online. So it's kind of doing your due diligence and your research.
Does anybody have any other questions?
When people are applying for jobs, they might want to consider the 50 employee
Right.
limit and say, I'll go with a bigger company.
Right, I'm just going to repeat this for the people. You said if people are applying for a company with less than 50 people, they should consider maybe not taking that job to having better benefits, more security. It's a really good point.
Other things like GINA also have caveats like that, and military insurance and government, like TRICARE, VA, things like that also have the same stipulations.
And then just another thing we really haven't talked about, but sort of like long-term care planning and figuring out how to pay for long-term care, whether that's a family member is going to help out, or if you're going to hire caregivers or nursing homes. The only insurance that covers long-term care is Medicaid, and Medicaid is for people with very low income. And also the restrictions that come with that is that not every nursing home accepts Medicaid, and so not all of them are great. Some of them are pretty good. You have to do your due diligence. You want to make sure it's a good facility. There are attorneys that help specifically with Medicaid planning, and that's something you have to do 5 years ahead of time for planning for financial look back, but that's just something to kind of tuck in the back of your head to know that that's something, if you're planning you can do that, and it would ultimately cost a couple $1,000s for something like that, but in the long run, it's a huge cost savings for that kind of service.
When it is, because one thing that hasn't been talked about today that I'm going to talk about tomorrow is Medicaid, and there's a 5-year look-back period for Medicaid. So any money that is moved in that 5-year period counts as an asset and a resource. So stuff has to be moved in advance, and Medicaid laws are very specified and intricate and complex, and so you need, yeah,
And they're state specific.
and they're state specific.
Right. I mean, that's the problem. We're 50 different states with 50 different, Medicaid programs, and Medicaid has home care waiver. So if you have very low income, you can get home care covered by the state. But again, you have to be you have no assets, and each state is very different. So like Medicare insurance for people 65 and older doesn't cover home care. They'll cover home care if you have a skilled nursing need. So let's say you have a wound care, then they'll possibly maybe bring a home care and a physical therapist in, but doesn't cover like a home attendant or a home health aide to help with bathing. Doesn't cover long-term care. It'll cover like a rehab stay at a nursing home if you need to go from a procedure to a nursing home for physical therapy or occupational therapy or wound care or something like that. Doesn't cover long-term care. So there's just so many things to think about. I don't want you to leave here like, oh my God, there's so much. But just to put this all on your radar, just kind of tuck it away, take what's applicable for you right now, and then have important conversations with yourself and prioritize what you need to do for future planning.
Sorry. Federal income tax. So my tax, my income or my SSI rather is taxed. And at a combined rate with my being married. But is there any legislation in the future to where maybe I get an exemption for my part of what I'm taxed at?
No, but I'd be very happy for you to advocate that and make that change. It's on my list. And just as Emily was talking about how this is really just a conversation starter, another one of the resources I've created is a disability checklist for where people are in different stages of the process. So what disability planning looks like, legal planning looks like, financial planning looks like, and so it's more of like, these are the things to consider. Getting insurance through your employer if you can, thinking about these different options, and it's high level because this is all overwhelming. This is a lot. This is a 1,000 step process. We're trying to take you through steps 1 through 10. It's day by day. Stuff comes up. We have amazing resources. Don't hesitate to use them.
And I want to add the community, just you're all here, so you all know that. But just being in a space with each other where you can pick each other's brains and ask what works, what doesn't work for you. Obviously, it's going to be a different path for every single person in this room, but you all have a shared experience of HD, and so tapping into that community. I know COVID has been terrible for us, but even the Zoom support groups, it's been really, really nice. This at-risk group that I lead took forever to take off for a really long time, for maybe 12 months. Nobody showed up, and now we have a really good turnout, right?
I just wanted to plug that Emily is amazing, and she is fully the reason that I'm here today because I was introduced to HGSA through the at-risk support group. So if you're at all considering doing a support group, I really would recommend it.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think obviously it's much better to be in a room, but I think also just HD it's hard to find someone, your neighbor, you're not, some people do have neighbors that have, HD, and it's incredible, but other times, you're pretty far away or you're in a remote area, and so using the technology and the certain resources, and I think there have been some silver lines to COVID, right? Now I think there'll always be virtual appointments with doctors for people who just can't make it. So you might have to show up once for your initial, appointment to your center of excellence, and then maybe they'll say, okay, you can come twice a year and we'll see you those other times. Actually, HDSA has a grant that's evaluating telehealth with a lot of centers of excellences, so they're doing that study right now to see if that works. So I think that's a silver lining. I think there will always be virtual support groups. There'll be more content online for people so that you'll always kind of be able to click and get information.
Oh, and I know we talked about this earlier, but I am going to plug the HDSA Centers of Excellence because they also have phenomenal assistants like social workers. Social workers are so important in this process, getting access to care, getting access to resources, getting help applying for disability. And you're not going to get that. Social workers are not guaranteed at care facilities outside of Centers of Excellence.
Yeah, and all the Center of Excellences have social workers, and the thing we'll say is like, oh, I might not have that answer, but I'll get it for you in a day or two, because that's sort of our role. And it's like, the doctors will see patients for an hour or two, and then we're all the in-between conversations and everything, and advocating and doing whatever we can. We do in-services at nursing homes, we do in-services at schools, we do, however you need us. We have a lot of different hats, so we're happy to help.
There was one online question I was going to address. So the form I mentioned earlier to talk to Social Security, it's called a 1696 appointment of representative. If you have questions, you can email me at, what's my, it's my email is abartlett@hdsa.org. Or you guys can find me at my table and I'll give you my card.
And the HDSA website has all of the Center of Excellences on there. So if you're looking for a place closer to where you live, if you go onto the website, and on the top, I think on one of the top bars, it'll do a drop down and you can find all the Center of Excellences for you. Good.
I don't know if I really want to go down that road today, because that's playing the what if game, but that would have a lot of very negative consequences for this community, because it would get rid of the mandatory coverage until you're 26. That was when we instituted the rule that you had to have coverage regardless of a pre-existing condition. So there would definitely be negative consequences. We all know the cost of healthcare is exponentially increasing. Like, I don't know what would happen, like with health insurance and all the other costs. And I don't want to think about that, because we all have a lot of other things that are hanging over our head, and that's a what if game I don't want us to play. Let's enjoy everyone's company, take comfort in the fact that we all get to be here in person for the first time in 3 years, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming.